All right, I'm with Tom Gantert of Michigan Capital Confidential, managing editor. And Tom, you specialize a lot with education, the education policy, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. All right, so we're talking today about teacher pay. Is it too much? Is it not enough? Are there legitimate gripes or are people just complaining? So why don't you share your thoughts, Tom?
Um, what I would start with is that start with Michigan. That the average teacher
Mm-hmm.
salary is about $62,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned is that too much? I would say I don't think there's a situation in Michigan where there's a teacher that's making too much. Um, the debate is, you know, in terms of salaries, is it differs for every district. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what I say is there's no such thing as an average teacher salary,
Really?
because you can have a teacher in Benton Harbor who, if you took that might be making $52,000 a year. If you
Mm-hmm.
took that same teacher with the same qualifications, same situation, and put them in Oakland County, they might be making $98,000 a year.
And
So
what are the cost of living between the two locations? I mean, not that that necessarily, I understand the job's the same, so I'm not discounting that fact. I'm just curious, do we know what the cost of living is between the two?
you can find that out. There's websites that we've done that for. But I'd point out, you can go, let's take Benton Harbor and St. Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
You can take that same Benton Harbor teacher who's making, 48,000. They might be making, 64,000 at St. Joe,
Okay.
which is a bordering district.
Right.
So a lot of this has to do with things that I still haven't figured out. I've contacted Benton Harbor and St. Joe and tried to figure out why there's such a discrepancy in salary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they won't give you an answer. So
Really?
yeah, they don't. I
What?
don't think they know. I think a lot of it has to do with what they value as teachers, but I also think a lot of it has to do with the overall workforce. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so
Right. I agree with that. I mean, I could see that for sure. I mean, but we are seeing, I just actually read an article and although not specific to Michigan, it did say that teachers are, I mean, the article says they're leaving in droves, but of course they don't say, are they, is this a combination of retirements or are they talking like a million teachers left the field in like 2018 or something like that. And
mm,
a lot of it's because they're saying, they're saying that it's pay. And but I will tell you this much. I substitute teach at my local school district from time to time. I've substitute taught in K through 12. I mean, all the way from kindergarten all the way up to senior level classes. And man, I tell you what, that is a hard job. I like to be the aunt. I come in, I get to see the kids, I get to have fun with them for a day, but I don't have to raise them. It is a tough job, especially now.
well, I would say one of the things that I think about teaching is that we do a lot of it in my website. We're heavily criticized for quote not liking teachers, and I think teachers, it's a noble profession like a
Hmm.
police officer. But I will tell you that I think that um, first let's talk about pay. When you talk about teachers, they complain about pay a lot.
Hmm.
And I've done a lot of research on this, and I've looked at. I've gone back and looked in the 1950s what teachers were being paid,
Hmm.
and it's roughly the same. If you look, the average teacher salary in Detroit public schools was about $52,000 a year in the 1950s. Now I did that because I went and looked on the Detroit Free
Hmm.
Press, and they had stories on it, and they listed what the average teacher salary is, the equivalent if you factor in inflation.
Sure.
So it's about 52,000. Well, here we are in 2019. When
Hmm.
I looked at this, it was the same thing.
Hmm.
Teachers have been making the same amount of money in comparison to society for about what was that 70 years.
Hmm.
So when I started in journalism, um, I had discussions about what we were going to get paid, and journalists get paid less than teachers on
Hmm.
average. And one of the things that I knew is what my pay was going to be if I got into this profession. I knew what the high bar was going to be, because
Right.
I was told that. Teachers, I've seen teachers that are 3 or 4 years into the profession saying, I can't raise a family on this, and we saw that in Ann Arbor. Teacher said that,
Mm-hmm.
and my point is, did you check and see what you're going to get paid?
Right.
Now, the other thing about teachers that I think you have to talk about is, when you talk about salaries, but it's also not just salary, but compensation,
Mm-hmm.
because the health care benefits they get and the pensions they get
Mm-hmm.
are quality. Now,
Oh.
the issue right now also with health care is there are some districts, okay, who have incorporated a health care plan for their employees where their employees do not have to make any contributions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Then we've seen to their health care. So in effect, basically what they're getting is free health care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've also seen some districts who have the very expensive program and also don't use what they call a hard cap, which means the school district pays a certain level, and anything after
Mm-hmm.
that the employee pays. And the employee is paying as much as 25%
Mm-hmm.
of the healthcare costs. And if you
Ouch.
look, in these healthcare policies in general
Mm-hmm.
cost the school district about $17,000 a year. Okay, so if they're paying 25% of that, some of these teachers are paying $4,000 to $5,000 dollars
Right.
a year for their healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So it can get expensive, but they're getting
Right.
quality healthcare. So
Well, and I mean, and I totally see that. I mean, but I want to go back to your point, but of course I see, I've always said that too, the point that when you went into the teaching profession, you knew what you were getting yourself into as far, check your salary before you go. Having said that, I will say this though, regardless if they're making the same amount, adjusted for inflation as in the 50s, here's the thing. They have to now, they're overwhelmed with these ridiculous standardized tests. I mean, and there's more than one. They have the downfall of the family. So, I mean, these teachers, they're like the mayor, the doctor, and the lawyer now. I mean, I've sat in these classes and I'm in a school district where there's a lot of parental involvement in a good way. And I still see the challenges. I mean, you have kids walking in that, let's say a high school teacher, 30 people for classroom, 5 classes or even 6 classes. You're looking at roughly 150-ish students, 120 to 150 students. Then you're dealing with their parents. I mean, you have 8 learning disabilities, you have ADD, you have some children that are from broken homes or poor parenting. You have hunger issues, you have abuse issues, and of course you have, I mean, I don't know what the percentage, is of kids, but you just get 1 or 2 kids per class in that, and you can get overwhelmed pretty quick. And a lot of these behavioral issues, I don't know if it's because of electronics or food or what, but these kids are like, sometimes they can be really hard and disruptive, to the classroom. So, I mean, if they're making the same as they were in the 1950s, I mean, to me, that's kind of messed up because they have so much more responsibility now, and it can be really exhausting. And then that's outside of just their regular everyday work. So, I mean, I would say a decade ago, I probably was a little bit more like, you knew what you were getting yourself into. But now I'm like, man, I wouldn't do it. Thank God somebody does, so.
well, I think there's a couple of things that we should go over to about why a well-paid teacher is becoming unsatisfied with what they're making. Okay,
Hmm.
and I see this a lot, and it's almost every school district. After the way teachers are paid in Michigan, they're paid on 2 things. They're paid on the years of service they worked, and they're paid on the level of education credits they've attained. Okay,
Hmm.
so on the pay scale, you go up for every year, and then you also go up if you got a master's or you
Isn't
make
it required to have a master's?
no,
They're re-
it's not
they're
required.
not required in Michigan to have a
No,
master's.
they
I
do
thought they were.
continuing education, and most of them do
Okay.
get masters, but it's not required to have a
Okay.
master's degree.
Gotcha.
But they go up based on those 2 things.
Hmm.
Okay, so what happens that I've seen a lot of is you get a teacher that makes, let's talk about, out in Oakland County, you can get teachers making $92,000 a year. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a good salary for a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're making $92,000 a year, and you hit what in the union contract, what I call the ceiling or the cap.
Right.
Okay. What that means is that the ceiling and cap is different in every contract, but generally in some school districts, like in Ann Arbor, when I looked, it was 11 years, but it can be between 15, 12, 13, 14. After that, that's pretty much all you're going to get for the length of the contract. So you might go 3 years, and then the next year when it goes up, you might only get $1,000 raise. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what happens, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Mm-hmm. But what happens with those teachers is that once they hit that $92,000, they're fine. But for the next 5 or 6 years, they might only be making $93,000. So over a 5 thing, they do have stagnant pay. So It's one thing that first year to be making $92,000. 5 years later, when you're making the same salary, you're not so happy about what you're paid.
Right. Especially if they, they're contract negotiations for the union, then they end up paying more for their, so they're essentially getting a demotion in pay because of that.
What I probably looked at salaries of teachers from probably 200 school districts, and there's roughly about 500 in the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. Okay. I've looked at all the largest ones. Generally, you will see teachers make pay that their pay is going up. We've seen a couple school districts where that's not true, a couple. But the vast majority of teachers, from their first year to their 9th or 10th year, they're getting increases. Okay, so the idea that teachers' salaries are being cut, I except for a handful of school districts, I have not seen that. Okay. So when I see stories that say teachers have declining pay, I say no, they don't have declining pay. Now, one of the things that goes out there is the average teacher salary has gone down. Okay, over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, but that doesn't mean that a teacher is making less money individually. What it means, from what I've seen, is that you take a teacher at Troy, they're going to be making $96,000, $97,000 a year. They retire, so they retire. The $97,000 salary leaves. The new teacher that's hired makes $43,000. Okay?
Right.
You got a $56,000, $57,000 a year gap there, and that's going to bring down the teacher salary. All right, but from what I've seen, I personally have not seen, outside of a couple school districts, teacher salaries going down. I mean, outside of the stagnant pay that the top of the scale teachers make. Those are the most veteran teachers.
And again, I actually just read, was it EduWeek? I think it was EduWatch. I don't know, something like that. It was a publication it was comparing teacher salaries to like the national average salary, and they do make people like, well, they make more than the average, salaried person. I think the average salaried person in U.S. makes 50 some thousand, and again, the average teacher makes 60 some thousand. But again, I'm like, yeah, but you don't have 150 students a day you've got to deal with. Or on the other end, even in elementary school, I mean, you're dealing with some pretty,
Jamie,
yeah.
Let's be honest, too. They work 181 days, generally.
But during those weeks, they can work upwards of 70 hours a week. I mean, and then they have to go to these continuing education classes. Look, I looked at all that, and I agree with you. Yep, I always thought that too. Oh, cool, they get summers off. Well, they really get about 2 months off?
I don't necessarily think they get summers off, but they are scheduled to work 181 days. And there are teachers that do not work in the summer. Okay.
There are some, but it's not like they get a full 12 weeks. I mean, they don't walk out the last day of school when the kids do and come back when the kids do. I mean, you're generally in before that. But and I agree with you. Like, yeah, they work 181 days a year, but how many days are a lot of them working between, they have assignments for the kids. Yes, they get a planning hour, but they're planning. They have to, they have to take the kids' work home and grade it. And there's just so much more involvement. You have parents emailing you. You have to get on the phone with them after school. If you have your conferences, you have all these different things. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. It definitely, I think everybody should, if they have the time, just, go and even take, an opportunity to do it, even if it's just job shadowing or something, because and to see the kids. I mean, there were two classes in this elementary school. They were fifth grade classes, and they were next door to each other. And several substitute teachers were like, I won't even teach those classes. They're so out of control. And it's not the teachers. The teachers are amazing. It's just they just happen to be a particularly unruly group of kids. So the teachers would call me because even though it was a challenge, like, yes, the kids were bad in a lot of ways. They were naughty, but like I loved them too, and the kids, man, they have a BS meter. They know. They just have an extra level of intuition. So, I mean, when, you get a class like that, and that's, then you just have an added extra, behave. Like I said, you're becoming a counselor, you're becoming a tutor, you're becoming a, first responder. I personally have had to report two children to the school administration or counselor or whatever because of things that the kids told me. I mean, and it was heartbreaking. And I'm like, wow, I'm a mandatory reporter. So I went and reported that, so, 180 days a year. Yeah. But you know what, to me, like, you still couldn't pay me enough. I mean, it's crazy.
That's the other thing is that, teaching's not for everybody.
Right. For sure. And I love kids, but it does take a commitment. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's some other things I wanted to discuss. One of them is in the Michigan public schools, the worst teacher can make more than the best teacher because there is no pay in Michigan that's based on how good of a teacher you are.
Now, but how is that? But now, how do you measure what is a good teacher? Is it children outcomes? Is it, how do you measure that?
Well, there's a lot of ways you can do it, and they've talked about a lot of ways of factoring test scores, evaluations, and all the things. But I'll tell you this: my sister worked, my oldest sister worked in Eau Claire Public Schools, and she was not a teacher, but she was a guidance counselor. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about her school when she was working there, and she worked there for 16 years, I believe. And she told me she could tell me who the best teachers were, who the worst teachers were, and who the average teachers were. They know. The people in the schools know who the good teachers are. The fact that they can't come up with a system to evaluate that is based on my, all the research I've done and interviews I've done, is because they don't trust the administrators to do a fair job of it. Okay. So when you talk about evaluations, you're talking about, a teacher told me that one school district, the principal gave everybody in their school in that building highly effective. Okay. So all the teachers got highly effective, which is not realistic. And then that made other teachers upset because the principal from their school district only gave 33% highly effective because he had a much more realistic. So it creates all these.
There's there's too much subjectivity there, is what you're saying.
Well, I don't think they take it seriously. Mm-hmm. 98% of Michigan teachers, are rated in 2 out of the 4 categories: highly effective and effective. And it comes out to be about roughly 38% of the teachers in the state are highly effective. 50% are effective. That's 98% of the teachers. The other 2% are in the bottom 2 categories: mentally effective and ineffective. So when you got 98% of your teachers in 2 categories, I don't think they're taking it they're doing it seriously or realistically.
I would tend to agree with you there. And let's take a quick break, and we will come back here in just a second on another segment, and we will discuss that more. So hang on here just a second.